I remember going there one lunchtime, not getting a reply and letting myself in, and there he was still in bed. Probably the worse for drink, and I just felt immensely, immensely sorry for him, and I asked him then, I think that was the first time I ever talked about his drinking, I asked him, why do you drink? And he had said, despair really, and those words actually just gave me such a shock.
The extraordinary thing about his drinking was that, unlike almost all alcoholics I've ever met, it really didn't affect his behavior in terms of his aggression or anything of the kind. He never became unpleasant on alcohol. It was a sort of private thing. He didn't go and booze with mates and become a hellraiser or anything of that kind. It was just something he did, and I'm in no way qualified to explain why he drank so much. But at least it didn't make him an unpleasant person, which is a relief.
I think one of the great tragedies of comedy is that it runs out. There are very few people who go on inventing, and when you don't have any more to say, if you haven't got anything else in your life, you're beached and horrible, or your life is horrible. And I think a lot of comedians who write their own material reach a point at which they can't create any more, and then I think life becomes absolutely desperate.
Yes, that's true. I tend to drink too much.
Why?
In fact, why? I don't know. I think it's a symptom of boredom, really.
It's nothing to do with boredom or anything else. Actually, it's because I was found under a seashell in Dorset. My real mother threw me away in the seaweed, and I've always felt badly about it, and I started drinking on gripe water, which I really liked. You can't get it now, though. Gripe water with a little bit of brandy in it is okay. Yeah. And because I was abandoned under the seaweed, under a seashell, when I was 43, that is what's so upsetting about it.
You were born at the age of 43, weren't you?
Yes,
Came out
about 2 years now. Midlife crisis as soon as I got off her tips. There are only 2 items on the menu.
Yes.
First of all, there is frog à la pêche.
Ah.
Frog à la pêche, basically a large frog, is brought to your table covered in boiling cruncher with a peach stuck in its mouth. One of the most disgusting sights I've ever seen. The only alternative to frog à la pêche is even worse. Pêche à la frog. Pêche à la frog. A peach is brought to your table by the waiter, again covered in boiling cruncher.
The waiter?
Very often, yes.
As the years went, he became a much happier person. It wasn't as though his life was just one long drinking session. It really was not like that at all.
But do you feel that you have learned from your mistakes?
Oh, certainly. Certainly. I have learned from my mistakes, and I'm sure I could repeat them exactly.
Yeah.
Look, we must keep in touch.
Absolutely. Look, I'll give you a tinkle.
Or vice versa.
Yes, you must do this again.
Yes.
Goodbye.
Ronald is a pretty ordinary name, and until I dropped my N, nobody took a blind bit of notice that Roald makes me sound mysterious and important. If Ronald Biggs had called himself Roald, like me, he could have got away with daylight robbery. Like many intensely private people, I've always had a burning desire to be on television so that the public could recognize me in the street and I could pretend to be upset. I often ask what it is that sparks off my ideas, what fires my imagination. In tonight's story, we see how a desire to be famous causes an author to lose more than his end, more than his reputation, more than life itself.
He wanted to be a showbiz celebrity. It really mattered to him a great deal. One of the reasons why he carried all these magazines and newspapers around. It was news about people in the news. It was a sort of a circular business. I mean, the newspapers were, in fact, the gazette in which the famous were recorded, lampooned, destroyed, and elevated. And he was fascinated by that world.
I used to write for Punch before I reached puberty. And 4 guineas you got. They had a section called Charivaria, and you made a little comment about the news. And they sent you 4 guineas. But the onset of puberty made me unable to contribute to Punch.
You're sort of the Rambo of humour, were you? All your best work was behind you.
I more as the Marquis de Sade of humour.
He was Lord No, really. I mean, he, you know, there was something in there, I think it's in the Alec Guinness book, where he says to Alan Bennett, why is there so much fuss about Peter Cook's death? Which is a strange thing to say anyway, but, and Alan Bennett says, because he was a journalist. And I think there's an element of truth in that there was a, but I think Peter was an anti-journalist. He loved newspapers and hated them, you know, at the same time. So he'd always have 8 or 10 newspapers. But it was also like, it was grist to his mill. I mean, you know, whatever was happening was something he could comment on. So he's like a social commentator all the time.
I think I remember him most clearly, sitting in Private Eye, the rest of us all sitting around completely listening and waiting for what he was going to say next. He almost always did the covered bubble of Private Eye. He used to come in on Sunday mornings, and he'd have a cigarette on, and he'd just sort of think like that and just go slightly out of focus. And then we'll come up with some colossally good joke. I mean, the famous one of Enoch Powell, at the time of his speeches against black immigrants, there was a picture of Enoch Powell sitting on a sofa. Peter said, and some of them have them this long. He had a wonderful kind of rage. I suppose that, to go back to the question of satire, he did get incredibly angry about bad politicians.
Where else in the world could an ordinary grocer's daughter from Grantham have risen to a position of supreme power? And where else in the world would anybody have put up with her for so long? I used to think she was an honest politician until she had her teeth fixed. That was one of the things that I really liked about Harold Macmillan. He may have been lying through his teeth, but at least they were his.
I see round me 4 million people unemployed. Millions of others out of work. And what does that ghastly woman do? What does that ghastly woman do? Bugger all.
So you blame Mrs. Thatcher?
Hold on a moment. Don't start putting words into my mouth. When I said that ghastly woman, I don't call her ghastly just because she's a woman.
No.
And I don't call her a woman just because she's ghastly. But she is a woman, and she is ghastly.
In my view, if anybody thinks they can run the country, they must be mad. And of course, if you are mad, you're not entitled to vote. Well, I think it's about time that only the loonies are allowed to vote.
The Westy voice that became the generic voice of the sketch and would finally became Prime Minister for about 7 years, which was the most extraordinary sight, which was nice that Peter should die during the time when Earl Whisty was actually Prime Minister, the sort of man who would go around quoting strange facts.
The interesting fact about the Arab is he can go for a whole year. He can go for a whole year on 1 grain of rice. That's amazing, isn't it? All he needs is 1 grain of rice a year.
A whole year on 1 grain of rice?
No. That's the mosquito. Now I'll get those muddled up because they're next door to each other in the dictionary.
What are?
Mosquito and mosques.
Shall I tell you something? You're one of the most boring, tedious, uninteresting, monotonous, flatulent, flat-headed, cloth-eared, swivel-eyed, fornicating little gits I ever nailed on.
But I've some bad news for some people. I'm fit, I'm well, I'm here, and I'm staying.
Is that a fact? Oh, very interesting.
Years ago,